Thanks for choosing to listen to this Late Night Linux Family podcast. We're only able to do this because of the people who support us. None of our shows are paywalled, but our Patreon supporters can get most episodes early and never hear any ads. Learn more at latenightlinux.com/support or support us by telling a friend or colleague about everything we do. 2.5 Admins, episode 304. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get going, your customary Clara article plug, Alan, is managing cache and direct I/O for databases on ZFS.
Yeah, so in this article, we talk about how to avoid double caching and make sure that you're caching only in your database or only in ZFS, not both, to get the most out of your RAM, and how you can leverage the new direct I/O feature in ZFS to be able to control on a per read and write basis what get cached and what does not.
Okay, and another plug for your webinar on the 30th of June.
Yeah, so on June 30th at 11 a.m. Eastern, we'll be hosting a FreeBSD After Hours AMA. So myself, Kyle Evans, who's the head of FreeBSD at Clara, and Colin Percival, who's the FreeBSD release engineer, will be talking a bit about what happened at BSDCan that we just got back from and taking questions from the audience.
Right, well, links to both of those in the show notes. Landmark German ruling declares Google's AI overviews are Google's own words and makes it liable for false answers.
Yeah, so this one came out of specifically a lawsuit about libel in this case, where Google's summary connected two companies with some scams and saying they were complicit in them when they were not, and saying that is libelous against those companies.
Yeah, which is different from Google linking to a website that says that, because it's actually on google.com or .de or whatever in the AI overview. And so the court is saying, no, you can't have that defensive, it's just you linking to it. This is your responsibility.
Yeah, your AI said that this is true, and it's not. Now, that's not saying that everything Google says that's wrong can get them sued, but if they say something bad about a person or a company that's not true, that is the definition of libel.
Yeah, in one sense, this is it's about damn time. Like, who else could be liable for this but Google? When Google says the bad thing, you don't just get to say, oh, well, yeah, I said the bad thing, but it wasn't like me directly. It was my chatbot that I trained on a data set that I selected that said it, so I can't be liable for that. No. You don't get to kick the can down the road like that. The other thing that's interesting about this is, as somebody who worked in journalism, you have to be careful about saying things that could be potentially libelous. And one of the things that it's always good journalistic practice to do, when you've researched something and you see, okay, it would appear that, this thing, which is really damaging to this entity that's part of this story, is true. But I really just know about this because, I've looked at all the other news covering it. A lot of the news that you do is follow on, basically, which is a lot of what Gemini is doing in these AI overviews. It's essentially doing, I would say, second order coverage, but by the time it gets down to the freaking AI, it's going to be like tertiary at best. Regardless, the point is, when you're not the primary source on something, it's a good idea to name your source. Don't say X did a bad thing when Y is the one who told you X did the bad thing. Say, according to Y, X did a bad thing, and provide the link to Y saying it. That is generally not considered libelous. Somebody who's really lawsuit happy might, threaten you over it anyway. But generally speaking, all that takes is your own lawyers, sending them a cease and desist and, kicking sand in their face, and they go away. Whereas if you read, the article that Y wrote that said X did a bad thing, and now you just say, when X did this bad thing, follow on whatever happened. Nope, that's in your words now. And you might still be able to get out of it in court if you talk about where that came from. Maybe. But you're going to have to go to court even to figure that out. And your odds aren't great even in court. And the real goal is to avoid ever having to get in front of an actual judge.
Well, in that spirit, according to this article from thedecoder.com, they say, at the hearing, Google argued that users could check the linked sources themselves to verify whether the AI summary was correct. Users generally knew that, in quotes, the information generated with AI should not be blindly trusted. And that is quite the admission. I mean, we all know it, right? But for Google to come out and say that is noteworthy.
Yes, but at the same time, it's like we all know that. But do most of the people using Google actually know that the summary at the top is half the time full of shit? I don't think every person knows that the AI is not actually that right.
I would argue that the issue here is not that people don't know, it's that they don't care. You can't tell somebody that putting a plugged-in toaster in a bathtub is a good idea and then just say, but don't necessarily. I mean, I think it is. Yeah, maybe not. But really, it's probably fine. But I'm not always correct about things. Like, actually, you still did, a thing that you could be criminally liable for if you go around advising people to put a toaster in a bathtub and then saying, but you can't always trust me. Like, that's not sufficient defense. It feels like what Google's legal team was really going for here was a very American defense to libel, which is that if most people know that, you're a liar in the first place, oddly enough, under American law, that is a defense to libel or slander, because the idea here is that since everybody should know that you're a buffoon who never tells the truth, it doesn't matter what you said, so it couldn't cause any material harm, and therefore it is not libel or slander in the eyes of U.S. law. This is a way that our current sitting president has avoided a lot of lawsuits.
Ironically, given how many lawsuits he files.
Correct. But the follow-on issue here is that as we have seen, again, with said sitting president, just because people know that the source of this statement is frequently incorrect doesn't stop people from acting on it as though it were. So the damage can very much still occur when you're talking about, potentially millions of people hearing something potentially libelous from a known dumbass source. The damage is still there, even if you happen to be in my home country, and unfortunately the legal remedy is not.
What is also interesting here, I think, is basically the basis of the court's ruling is that the AI overviews, which generate, quote, new content loosely based on sources, and comparing that to traditional search results, where it's like, here's a list of sources and we're directly quoting from that source. And that's where this lawsuit comes from. But in many other areas, it's not yet settled whether something the AI comes up with is its own new thing rather than just regurgitation of the other things. And so while in this case, the ruling is on the side we want, does it possibly set a bad precedent saying that, an AI that's loosely based on a bunch of inputs is something entirely novel? Is that a good thing?
Is the word transformative in copyright law? Something like that? Like you take something and then you transform it?
It depends on whose copyright law. But yes, really the transformative stuff usually applies more to either parody or like in musical senses, like a remix. That's where the transformative stuff really comes into play when you're talking about commentary or parody or permissible remixes in a musical sense. Again, at least in my country, but if you're not American, don't take everything I say about law for granted because your laws might be different than mine.
Well, and even then, you're not a lawyer.
Fair enough. And I'm certainly not your lawyer. I want to get back, though, to the idea of like how Google's AI, quote unquote, summarizes these things and the fact that it does not follow journalistic best practice when it does so. I just now decided to ask Google. Well, I not really ask Google. I put in the query, best Wi-Fi access point. And AI overview. The best Wi-Fi access points combine high speeds, easy manageability, and robust multi-device handling. Leading options depend on your ecosystem, ranging from the enterprise-grade Wi-Fi 7 Ubiquiti U7 Pro to the budget-friendly and local control-focused TP-Link Omada EAP 670. Well, for one thing, these are Google's AI's own words. It's making a statement based on what it, and I know I'm being loose here, what it thinks it has learned from rummaging through the data set before. This is not something it looked up when you looked it up. This is the results of an inference query. It's using its own words to describe a pattern that it thinks it's observed in its training data set. And although there are links sprinkled throughout this AI summary, it doesn't say, as said in, Tom's, networking guide or whatever. It just tells you things as true. And then it offers links later that you can look at to see whether it's a lying piece of crap or not. And in fact, in some of this stuff, it kind of is a lying piece of crap because there's nothing more enterprise about Ubiquiti gear than Obata gear. But, it just claimed it. And it didn't say, this person said this. It just said, Ubiquiti's enterprise, TP-Link is local control.
Yeah. The other one that was interesting later in the article is the court also examined some existing rulings from Germany's Federal Court of Justice, where there's currently limited liabilities for traditional search engines, but specifically for autocomplete. So when you start typing, Jim is A, and then it autocompletes something unsavory, there's limited liability for that. And it's, at some point, is an LLM just autocomplete ad nauseum? But, in this case, they're saying the AI overview is independent, new, and substantive content, not just guessing what the next word would be.
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to 2.5admins.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to send in your questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Morgan writes, we are planning to tear down our basement to just the outside walls and reframe. I would like to wire the house for Ethernet when we do. I have several questions. So let's take these one at a time. The first one, I see there are lots of cable specs. Do I want Cat 6, Cat 7, or Cat 8? I would like to make sure I'm future-proofing everything, but I don't want to waste money.
Cat 6 is fine. You very much don't want something like Cat 8. You can mess around with Cat 7 if you want to, but in my opinion, you're just going to be burning money for no real reason.
So instead of buying overpriced cables, especially Cat 8, that's a standard that might not be what the future actually ends up using, if you instead, inside the walls, run core line or ENT, electrical non-metallic tubing, also sometimes called Smurf tubing, is kind of a plastic conduit that's flexible. And you put that in the walls. And then if you in the future find that, Cat 6 isn't the best thing anymore, and we're going to Cat G or Cat 9, or everything's fiber now, you can pull that through that existing conduit in your wall without having to tear the wall out. But you didn't spend all your money right now on a cable that might be the right thing in the future, but might not be.
Yeah, we call that Copex here, or just flexible conduit.
I would strongly advise not asking for ENT, because that sounds like EMT, electrometallic tubing. And if you go down to Lowe's and ask for ENT, they're probably going to take you straight to the electrometallic tubing, which is very widely used in professional construction. So if you don't want the metal stuff, ask for Smurf cable or flexible conduit or something like that.
Yeah, and it has a lot of different trade names in different countries, so it can be a little confusing, but it's this kind of corrugated plastic tube that you put in the wall and lets you run your cable through it. And it means you can change the cables later without as much faff. And it's much better investment than trying to future-proof by installing cable you hope is what is going to be used in the future.
The other thing that you can do for future-proofing is, in addition to the cable itself, you can optionally run a small line along with it called a fish line, so that even without having to pull the entire other cable through the whole conduit, you can take the fish line and you can tie a second cable and pull that all the way through with the string, and that's another way that you can make that work. Now, the other thing that you might see when you start shopping cables is you'll see some shielded cables. You don't want that. There's no point. Unshielded twisted pair is unshielded because the twists themselves cause any electromagnetic interference to get canceled out on each side of each twist. So you really don't need the shielded stuff. It's a waste of money. The other thing that you'll see sometimes is plenum cable. You only need plenum rated cable if you're going to pierce a firewall. And then finally, if you want to do anything outside, you are very likely going to want to look for direct burial rated cable. You don't want to use the interior stuff outside if you can possibly help it. If you do, it's going to deteriorate and cause problems, and it may take some equipment with it as it degrades. So just don't do that. If you want to go outside, make sure you get the outside stuff.
So you're saying don't bother with Cat 6A then and just go for Cat 6 for now?
For that one, I would say price shop. If it's a couple of cents more, then sure. But if it's a lot more money, don't bother.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that goes for most of these things. If you look at it and you're like, this price difference just does not matter to me, and you actually look at the specs and actually examine the cable and think this looks like a better thing to me, then yeah, by all means, spend a little extra money. But don't just dive into thinking I have to get cat the biggest number I can find, plenum rated, all the other things. You don't.
Yeah. The plenum rating is really about what happens if the cable gets burned, the smoke that it gives off. If it's going to be in an air duct or anywhere, you want to make sure it's not the one that's going to give off toxic gas.
The final thing I'll note about why I'm so dismissive about spending a ton of money and, future-proofing this stuff is I don't think copper has a future. Most of these really high ratings are, with the idea that you're going to run 10 gig over them, and you shouldn't be running 10 gig over them. By the time you hit 10 gig, you really need to be looking at fiber. So I would not blow extra money on this. Honestly, I've still got Cat 5e in a lot of networks, and I feel zero urge to rip it out and replace it with Cat 6.
I have Cat 6 in my house here, and I go from my basement through my main floor to the upper floor, and I get the whole 10 gigabits over the copper with no problem. I don't understand why anyone would spend money on Cat 7 or Cat 8.
All right, Morgan's second question then. Is there also a type or specification for the connectors and wall jacks?
You're looking for RJ45 is, the connector type, and it's female, obviously, in the jack. The biggest keyword kind of that you want to have in mind is keystone. The really good jacks are modular, and you can put RJ11 for, old school analog, or you can put in coax, modules, whatever you need. So basically what I would recommend is you want to look for some nice modular faceplates and the right keystones. That's what the modules are for the kind of connections that you want. You can do 2-gang, 4-gang, meaning how many of these modules are on like a single faceplate that goes on a single junction box. So, buy what you need for what you need to do. It probably is worth it spending the extra money to get a proper modular one, though. The cheapest stuff is just kind of all in one piece. Like, here is your plastic faceplate with a built-in RJ45. Those work, but it is probably worth it to get the nicer faceplates, in my opinion.
And so this is what I did when I wired up my house late last year. I even went so far as color coding some of the ports. So when there are some of the 2-gang ones, I bought different keystones that are like red or blue or whatever to indicate which ones are 2.5 gig and which ones are 10 gig and stuff like that. But I think the pack of 20 faceplates was $12 on Amazon. And those are the modular ones. Like, don't spend a lot of money on this. It's just a piece of plastic. And then, a couple of bags of the keystones.
Morgan didn't make it clear if we're talking about just asking contractors to do this or if we're doing the wiring ourselves. And if we're doing the wiring ourselves, we really need to talk about the actual termination of the cables. And if you're going to be building your own patch cables, so we're back to the RJ45 stuff. And one thing that I want to mention there is that there are 2 different types of crimping tools you can get. The old school type, you have to trim the cable for, and give yourself an inch. And then you have to trim the inch down to a half an inch or even a quarter of an inch once you've got all the wires laid out in the right order, and pinch them really carefully between a thumb and a forefinger and jam them very carefully into your RJ45 terminator. And it's not too bad to do once you pick up the skill, but it is very error prone and you do need some manual dexterity. There are also loom-style crimpers and connectors. Now, the actual RJ45 terminators you buy have to be the loom style, and the crimper has to be the loom style for this. But when you get one of those, you can just go ahead and strip an extra foot worth of, just the pairs out of the end of the cable. And now you've got lots and lots of room, and it's easy to wind them in one at a time and bring the terminator all the way back down to the jacket and then crimp it on. So if you have any issues with the manual dexterity or you just want to have an easier time of it, it's definitely worth spending a little bit more to get those.
And most importantly with that is you can see that you've definitely got them in the right order because they're poking out of the front of the RJ45 jack. And you can see, okay, I definitely didn't mess up this order.
Yes, and for the order, you need to look it up and you need to do it right. It's not enough that you have the same colors in the same positions on both ends. There are 2 different ways that you can wire this. There's an A spec and a B spec. Either is fine, but you need to pick one and you need to stick with it through the whole house, and everything has to be done that way. If you try to make up your own pinout, what you'll wind up doing is you'll induce crosstalk and your connection will be incredibly unreliable. I have seen people decide I'm just going to pick my own pinout and, I'm sure this will be fine. I've seen connections like that not even pass a ping more than 1 or 3 pings every 10 seconds. It's that bad.
Yeah, so I threw away my old crimpers and bought the pass-through kind that they're talking about here. And the crimper has the color code order on the handle so that you don't lose the little reference card or whatever. It was a great investment, but all the keystones I bought use a punch-down tool and were much easier. So I only crimped like 3 cables in my whole house. Everything else was done with the punch-down blocks and the keystones because it was just so much easier to do it that way. And I really hate making my own cables.
Whether we're talking about punching down to the keystone or, putting an RJ45 terminator on the end of a cable, either way, you have to follow the spec. You can do A or B. That part doesn't really matter, but whichever one you pick, every single one in the whole house do that way. Don't just say, well, I did A between these two. I'm going to do B between these other two because it is going to be a nightmare a few years down the line when you start having problems. And now you wind up tearing apart 10 perfectly good connections because you don't know what's wrong. So you have to attack anything that looks different. So don't make things look different. Do it all the same.
All right, the third question. If you want to do PoE, Power over Ethernet, are there additional requirements you should be looking at? Is it worth doing PoE capable everywhere or just places where you know it will be needed?
Do it everywhere, but there's no special requirement on the cable end. That really is just about, does your switch support PoE? And do you have enough ports to plug all of the cables into your switch into PoE capable ports? And if you can possibly manage it, yes, all PoE, because you have no idea where you're going to want to put an IP camera or, God only knows what in the future. And if you just know, look, I don't have to worry about it. Anywhere that I have Ethernet, I have power. It makes life so much nicer.
Yeah, and there's nothing special to do when you're cabling it. So everything is PoE capable. It's just up to the switch and the device on the other end.
All right, the fourth question. For access points, is there some guide to how many and where they would be needed? I know this is a big topic and there is lots of information out there. I'm hoping you can point me to one that could be trusted. Well, what about Jim's guide to Wi-Fi access point placement that you wrote for Ars Technica?
Absolutely. That covers pretty much everything that you'll be able to know for your first project. But if we want to boil that down to, some key advice, basically, I would recommend, if you can manage it, an access point at least in every other room. You really can't put in too many access points. The ideal, I'm not kidding, is one in every single room dead in the middle of the ceiling. Most people aren't going to want to do that in their house. I haven't even done that in my own house. But I will say I've got 7 in my house. And I mean, it's a relatively large house, but it's only 2 stories in a, relatively rectangular solid arrangement. It's not that the house is that difficult. It's that, yes, it really is worth it. And the reason is because the farther away you are from an access point, the more airtime you're wasting, not only for yourself, but for everybody, because only one device gets to talk at a time to any given AP.
Yeah, and if you end up putting in too many in quotes, then you've just wasted money, essentially. That's the only downside to putting in too many.
And you won't have wasted it. You'll have bought more performance than you maybe needed it, but no, it is not a waste putting an AP in every room. It will make a measurable difference. Whether you notice or care about that difference or not is another question. But yeah, the flip side of that is you don't need expensive access points. Expensive access points aren't really going to do you any good. You want inexpensive, decent access points like, basically the cheapest Wi-Fi 6 TP-Link or Ubiquiti stuff out there. Pick your poison, and as many of them as you can put in the house. A few very expensive access points are going to perform like crap compared to tons of cheap access points spread all through the coverage area.
And one thing you told me, Jim, when we talked about this a few months ago, was say you've got 2 bedrooms next to each other and you put one AP in each room. Well, if one of those APs dies, no one's going to notice probably.
Exactly. That's another reason that it's a good idea to have an AP in every room. Basically, your performance bang for the buck tends to be an AP about every other room. You really don't want a Wi-Fi signal to have to cross more than one room and one wall to get to the device on the other end. But if you've got one in every room, if you can afford it, or if you've got one in nearby rooms where like it's that area is really important, then you've got some redundancy. Because in Joe's example, where you've got 2 bedrooms side by side, if you've got an AP in each one and you lose one, you still will want to replace it. But in the meantime, nobody's like, my internet doesn't work.
Yeah. Exactly. And of course, keep the power low if you end up with loads of access points everywhere.
Yes. You don't ever really want the transmit power on high on any AP where you've got like a multi-AP setup. I don't recommend the transmit power on high unless you very much know what you're doing and very much know that that's something you want right there. Because the thing is, you can't turn up the transmit power on your phone or your laptop. It is what it is, and it is not going to do you any good to be able to hear an access point that can't hear you.
All right, the last question then. I have a location planned where I could put a rack or something for all the cables to be terminated. Do you have recommendations on what this could look like? This is the part I'm most unclear as to what to do.
Yes. So what you're looking for is called a 19-inch relay rack. In general, you're going to be looking at sizes anywhere from 12U to 42U. U really just means unit. And these are basically places that you can bolt standard-sized networking devices into. I don't know how many units you're going to need. You'll get a better idea when you start shopping these things. You know, kind of look on Amazon or whatever. You're looking at prices ranging from reasonable to, oh my God, I can't believe somebody's charging that for a chunk of steel. But what I would recommend personally, you're looking at about somewhere around $90 for a 12U cabinet to about $280 for a 42 unit cabinet on Amazon. 42U is going to be about 7 feet tall. Like that's a lot of space. That's what I've got in my recording studio here, and all my rack mount gear is in that. In my upstairs networking closet, I don't have a proper relay rack at all. I actually just put in a little cheapo wire rack, like, you know, the little wire shelving units that you might put spices on, or, you know, put in like a utility room to stack whatever on. It ain't fancy, but it's in a hallway closet with a door on it and nobody can see it, and it works. So pick your poison.
And if you want to go super, super cheap for a rack and do it my style instead of Jim and Alan style, you can get a lack table from IKEA, which is basically a cardboard table. And they're only £10 or similar in dollars. And they are apparently the exact same size. I've never done it, but you can bolt rack stuff to them in a pinch.
And now all this stuff can be wall mount. Well, you're probably going to wall mount a 7 foot tall 42U rack, but 12U, 18U, 24U, those can all be gotten as wall mounted cabinets. You can get as wall rack or freestanding, but you do want to check your depth, especially if you're getting wall mount. Any devices that you want to put in there, make sure you know how deep those are, because while all of these racks are 19 inches wide and the U for unit is, the same amount tall every time, the depth can absolutely vary. And, a network device like a switch might only be 12 inches, 18 inches deep, but a rack mount server might be close to 3 feet deep. So you want to have some idea of the depth that you need. And then the final thing is, if you look at floor standing, the absolute cheapest racks you'll find are 2-post racks, and I do not recommend that. Every rack that I mentioned here, the pricing, the $90 12U rack to the $280 42U rack, those are all 4-post. 2-post racks, it means there's just like one post on either side, and you're just kind of bolting your stuff to it, and it's very weeble wobbly, and I do not recommend that at all. I see a lot of that in very cheaped out, like stuff that you have a contractor do, like on new construction. They'll go for the 2-post stuff a lot. I do not approve. You can also get enclosed or not enclosed. None of the prices I mentioned are for enclosed racks. Those tend to be quite a bit more expensive. I really like and recommend the 4U open. The last thing I'll recommend is strongly consider some shelves. While you can bolt stuff like servers and switches and whatever directly to the rack, by the elephant ears on the faceplate, I prefer to use those as just kind of like a safety latch and just put like one screw through one hole. I really like sitting my stuff on a shelf and having the shelf bolted directly into the rack. That definitely adds some more to your cost. You're probably going to pay anywhere from about $15 to $35 per shelf, depending on how sturdy you need the shelf. But it really makes things a little nicer, and it just always makes me personally nervous having like 80 pounds worth of server hanging off of 4 bolts on a faceplate on one side.
Yeah. And I also threw a link in the show notes for the patch panel that I use at home. Basically, all those cables come out from all over the house and go into the backside of this with punch down. And then you can use, nice pre-made patch cables coming out of that going into all the gear. And it makes it It's a lot faster to install than trying to terminate all your own cables.
And to be clear, the patch panel is something that bolts into 2 of those units we were talking about in whatever rack or cabinet you get.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send any questions or your feedback. You can find me at joelrest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And alanjude.com for me.
We'll see you next week.